if we think about nutrients and nutrient density, which is really the currency of our health, right? You understood this as a vegan. Like if you don't have nutrient-rich food, you can eat a lot of food and you're not getting to be healthy. The cost of junk food is much higher than the cost of really good quality food if you're actually thinking about it in terms of the correct currency, right? If the currency is your health and overall nutrient status and overall nutrient adequacy, red meat, grass-fed beef is incredibly affordable. It's much cheaper than a chocolate bar. It's much cheaper than French fries. It's much cheaper than any junk food you can buy. But it's just that I think that I need to do a better job, or I hope to be able to help people understand that equation better, right? That red meat, grass-fed beef is very affordable when you think about what's in there.
Yeah.
And most of us don't think about that. We just think, does it make me full? Do I have enough energy to go to tomorrow? And well, top ramen is cheaper. Well, but top ramen is pretty expensive when you think about the nutrient. They're going to spend a lot of money on top ramen to get any sort of basically you'd spend infinite amounts of money because there's no nutrients, right? So I think that's always the equation. People think like, I can spend $4 to get a half pound of grass-fed beef, say ground beef, or I can spend $4 and get a bag of Lay's potato chips. And I would rather spend it on potato chips. And you think like, well, maybe that's not the best one to compare it to. What am I thinking? I don't know. Like a Snickers bar, or you could go to McDonald's and get like a Happy Meal or something.
Yeah.
A Big Mac, which actually has some meat in it. But the amount of nutrients you get in half a pound of pure ground beef versus a filet of fish sandwich at McDonald's, there's no comparison, right? So it's much more expensive to do that. I don't think people are calculating that in their head. And it's a more complicated calculation.
Yeah. So
those filet of fish sandwiches, man, they're fucking up the world. You think about the quality of the fish, the seed oils, all that stuff, it's horrible. So
not for me.
Not for you.
Oh, I think it's so funny. And I was just thinking back about how you went through your vegan phase as well. And it's very interesting that segment of vegans, the fasting, raw vegan. Like, how did you end up there?
I was a physician assistant, and it shows you there was essentially zero nutrition taught in PA school. And I was working in cardiology at the time, and I was running a lot. So I was doing like distance running, and I wanted to be fast. And it was like a series of books that talked about something that was interesting to me. And there was some idea that like cooking food is bad and creates toxins. And the fact that you're obviously cooking meat. And then I think I got into like David Wolf, this like kind of this like vegan guy that's, I think, is very passionate, or used to be very passionate, and had the ability to dissuade a lot of people or persuade a lot of people. And so I started reading his stuff. And so I thought, this makes sense. I should eat more salads. And then I'm just a person that wants to understand the edges of things. So if cooking food is bad, and if meat isn't something that we should be eating because we're clearly derived from primates, then let's just go completely raw vegan and I'll see how it feels. And of course, it didn't work out for me either. I farted a lot. I lost a lot of muscle mass. I didn't feel great in the end. It certainly didn't help my eczema. Thankfully, I only did it 7 months, or I think I would have developed more severe nutrient deficiencies and probably problems long-term, maybe with oxalate overload. But it was just an experiment. And then I remember the day where I was listening to a podcast from a guy connected with the Institute of Functional Medicine. And he was talking about our book of life and what's written in our DNA. And something just clicked back for me. And I thought, oh, of course it's written in our DNA that we're going to eat meat. What have I been doing for so long? But it took me like 6 or 7 months to figure that out. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas around vegetarian and veganism. I mean, humans are evolved from apes, apparently, chimps and bonobos. But I think that what I didn't understand at the time was that our brains are very different than theirs. They're much bigger, that there was this evolutionary shift in us, that we came down from the trees, potentially in East Africa, the Rift Valley, and we started walking upright, and that the inclusion of meat in our diet as humans in history was probably one of the key elements that actually allowed our brains to grow and for us to develop a rich neocortex and to be the functioning humans we are today. So this was the piece that was left out. It's like there's this compelling vegan argument when you think, oh, meat isn't good for us. And then you realize, like, wait, I'm not the same as a chimpanzee and my gut looks very different. And it's hard though. Like, it was interesting. I think a lot of people make this argument. I mean, there's a fruit stand here, and it's a typical Costa Rican fruit stand, that I was inside the fruit stand looking up at the ceiling. there's a big banner that says humans are frugivores. It's in Spanish. So it says like humanos somos frugivoros or something, like humans, we are frugivores. And I thought, I don't think we're frugivores. I don't think we're supposed to be fruitarian. If you look at like what happens long-term, humans do not look good as fruitarians. So these type of things were interesting to me. There's a piece of truth there. That's where we've come from, but I wasn't versed enough to understand it, but I went and explored it. And then I, had to come out of it.
I wish everyone could meet you in person so they could see how healthy you are, like how healthy you look. Whereas, some of the fruitarians and some of the vegans,
they don't look too bad.
Not so much.
I think that people can feel it. And that's what I want. I want people to be curious and to make their own decisions and to be curious and to live their lives. And if you want to try veganism, vegetarian, great. But understand that if you don't do well with it long term, which I think you won't, there are other ways to do this. And this came up before the podcast too. And I just want to make this point that there's this sort of other idea, which I think is a little bit dangerous, that like, oh, maybe vegan or vegetarianism works for some people, but not for others. And I just don't think that makes sense to me as a human. Like if you're Homo sapiens and you came from Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecines, all of us are the same species as far as we know, right? And we've come from this lineage of humans. We've all had the same gradual changes in our biochemistry, in our liver detoxification systems, in our brain. We all have the same requirements for nutrients. I mean, no matter who you are as a Homo sapien, you have a neocortex that is incredibly developed relative to chimps and bonobos and your primate ancestors. And so it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it's sound to suggest that some people can, with the same stomach and the same enzymatic systems and the same acidity and the same gut transporters, somehow magically absorb more nutrients from plant foods than the rest of us, because that's what would have to happen. There have to be this like magical alchemy that happens in the guts of some people where they can get nutrients that don't exist in plant foods, B12, K2, choline, anserine, taurine, creatine, carnitine. Like you have to create those in your gut or have some sort of specialized transporter or biochemical system. It just doesn't exist. I think what happens so often, and it's so interesting that you mentioned this to highlight it once more, is that people may feel, quote, good on a plant-based diet for a few years. And so what you see is people proclaiming, I feel great on a plant-based diet. And you're getting this window, this snapshot of people in the first 2 to 3 years, over and over and over. And then people fall off and they fall off and they fall off. And then you never hear about them again. And the vegan community looks back on them and says they did it wrong. And so we're not getting this actual real perspective on what happens to humans when they're vegan long-term. And I'll share my personal conspiratorial perspective that vegans who claim to be thriving long-term are full of shit. And I just don't believe it. Like hidden camera in their house, I know they're eating salmon.
I know, I was just going to say that. Like it is anecdotal, but I don't know any long-term vegan that doesn't sneak in like an egg here and there.
Right.
Right. When they're like getting to that point and they just have a little bit of a chop up and then they can... Yeah,
salmon isn't really meat. It's okay to eat salmon.
Once in a while.
I'm a vegan, but I eat salmon once a month. And it's like just enough to like keep them from absolutely cratering. This is what I think happens. Hidden camera.
The vegan dreams. Have you heard about the vegan dreams?
Do you dream about meat?
Yeah.
I didn't know this. I just guessed.
Because I shared a video on social media and I said towards the end of my veganism, I started like dreaming of meat and like loving it. And I was just received so many DMs from ex-vegans telling me that like intuitively their body like was sending them signals in their dreams about meat.
Eat meat. Oh my gosh.
So the vegan dreams tends to be quite common.
So there's a guy. So I did a podcast a few years ago with Elise Parker, who was Raw Alignment. She was like a very popular vegan who then went animal-based carnivore and felt way better. And she talked about specifically feeling like she was asexual on a vegan diet. She had no libido. She felt like she would just transition to like being completely asexual. And then she realized it was just the lack of nutrients. The other guy was Tim Sheaf, who was going to be in the Game Changers. He was a world-class free runner. So like parkour, free runner guy. They filmed him for Game Changers as a vegan. And then his health got so bad that he told them, you cannot put me in Game Changers. They couldn't use any of that footage of him in Game Changers. And Tim Sheaf's story of eating meat for the first time is probably one of the most viral I've ever heard, because he literally had a wet dream. He like ate salmon and then went to sleep and just ejaculated. It's like your body is like literally just like, thank God I'm fertile. You know, or I can actually like make like semen, or, you know, these things. I'm not trying to be crass. It's just actual human fertility. And that's crazy to me. It's interesting. It's like, basically these are like vegan craving dreams, or like, please, can you please go eat some meat?
Oh, it's so funny. I love, but it is quite sad, but it is good to have a bit of humor with it.
It's sad, but I think that like stories like yours are valuable because it helps people understand that like there are people who are being honest about this and have done so much better. I mean, your skin is great now. You're fertile. You've made this baby. You know, you've had a great pregnancy. It's like such a different life than you had when you were a vegan. And it's interesting to think like, well, we hear in the media, red meat is bad for you. More vegetables are good. It doesn't always work that way. In fact, I think it never works that way. So.